I've been on this earth for 79 years, and I want to tell you something that took me most of those years to figure out. I'm not a doctor. I never went to medical school. I raised 3 children, buried a husband, kept a garden alive through 2 droughts, and learned most of what I know about my own body the hard way, by ignoring it for decades and then finally, at 73, deciding to pay attention. That's what this is about. Not medicine. Not a program you buy or a supplement I'm selling. Just what I found out when I finally stopped doing 6 things that were quietly, slowly, making me old before my time. I want to start by telling you about a Tuesday afternoon in September, about 6 years ago now. I was sitting in my garden chair, the green one with the wide arms that Richard bought at a yard sale the summer before he got sick, and I had been reading. The afternoon was cool, the kind of cool that comes in September when summer finally decides to let go. I finished my chapter, closed the book, and went to stand up. And I couldn't. Not because I fell. Not because something snapped or gave out. I just couldn't get up on the first try. My arms pushed, my legs didn't follow, and I sank back down into that chair like a stone dropping into still water. I sat there for a moment and looked at my hands. Then I tried again, slower this time, and I got up. But something had shifted in me that I couldn't put back. I was 73 years old and I couldn't get out of a garden chair on the first try. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, Margaret, that's just age. That's just how it goes. And I thought the same thing, for about 3 days. Then I got angry. Not the loud kind of angry. The quiet kind. The kind that sits in your chest and doesn't leave until you do something about it. I had watched my husband Richard get smaller over the last years of his life. Not just thinner, smaller. Less of himself. He had accepted every limitation as it came, gracefully, which was his way, and I had admired it and also, secretly, been terrified by it. He was gone at 71. And I had promised myself, standing at that graveside in February with the cold coming through my coat, that I was going to do this differently. That I was going to fight, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. That afternoon in the garden chair was the moment I remembered that promise. So I want to tell you about 6 things I stopped doing. Not because some book told me to, not because a doctor prescribed it, but because I paid attention to my own body for the first time in my life and it told me, clearly, what it needed me to stop. The first thing I stopped was eating after 7 o'clock at night. This sounds so simple that some of you are already rolling your eyes, and I understand that. But stay with me, because the reason I stopped is not what you might think. Richard had a habit, all our married life, of having a little something after the evening news. A few crackers. Some cheese. Sometimes a small bowl of ice cream, the vanilla kind he liked with a little chocolate syrup. It was his ritual and I loved him for it. So I sat with him every night and I had a little something too. When he died, I kept doing it. I'm not ashamed to say that. It was a way of sitting with him still, at that kitchen table, in the quiet of the house. A way of not feeling the absence quite so sharply. But about 6 months after he passed, I started noticing something. I was waking up at 3:30 in the morning, and I couldn't get back to sleep. My stomach felt heavy. My mind was foggy in the mornings in a way it hadn't been before. My knees ached when I got out of bed, which I had been told was arthritis and had accepted, but the aching was getting worse. I didn't connect any of this to the crackers and cheese at 10 o'clock at night. Why would I? It was a small thing. Then one night I simply forgot. I fell asleep in my chair reading around 8 and went straight to bed and didn't have my little snack. And the next morning I woke up at 6, naturally, without the alarm, and I felt different. Lighter is the only word I have for it. Clearer. I thought it was a coincidence. So I tested it. 3 nights with the snack, 3 nights without. And it was not a coincidence. What I came to understand, not from a medical textbook, but from my own body, is that your body does its most important work while you sleep. It repairs things. It cleans things out. It processes the day. But it cannot do that work and digest food at the same time. You ask it to do both and it does neither well. My grandmother used to say you should stop eating when the sun goes down, and I thought that was old-fashioned nonsense. Turns out she was right and I was the one who was wrong. So I stopped. Last bite of food by 7, sometimes 6:30. After that, water or chamomile tea. That is all. Within a month, the morning fogginess was mostly gone. The 3 o'clock wake-ups became rare. And here is the thing I did not expect at all, the knee pain in the mornings. It got better. Not gone, but noticeably better. My doctor had told me that was just arthritis progression and nothing to be done. I'm not saying he was wrong about the arthritis. I'm saying that when I stopped making my body work all night digesting crackers, it had more left over to deal with everything else. The second thing I stopped was taking pills to sleep that I had chosen for myself. I want to be careful here because I am not telling anyone to stop medication their doctor has prescribed. That is not my place. What I'm talking about is what I was doing, buying things over the counter, melatonin mostly, and sometimes an antihistamine tablet that the pharmacist said was fine for sleep. I had started this at 70 during a hard stretch, and somehow it became just what I did at night. Part of the routine. I didn't think of it as a problem. I thought of it as managing things sensibly. But here is what I realized, slowly, over time. I was not sleeping better. I was sleeping, but it was a flat kind of sleep. I'd wake up and feel like I'd been somewhere grey for 8 hours. Not rested, just absent. And I was starting to need more of it to get the same effect, which worried me even though I didn't say that to anyone. What changed was not a decision so much as a week, when I ran out and couldn't get to the pharmacy easily and just didn't get more. And during that week I slept terribly. I will not pretend otherwise. 2 or 3 nights were genuinely hard. I lay in the dark and my mind went to every unfinished thought it had been postponing. But by the end of that week something had shifted. My body was finding its own rhythm again. And I started paying attention to what I was doing in the 2 hours before bed, which turned out to be the actual problem. I was watching the evening news, which is designed to make you afraid and alert. I was leaving lights on all over the house. I was lying in bed and letting my mind go over everything that hadn't been resolved that day, which is a long list when you live alone and have time to think. So I changed those things instead. I turned the television off at 8. I open the bedroom window for a few minutes before I lie down, even in winter, just briefly, because the cool air does something to my body that I can't explain, but I trust. I keep a small notebook on my nightstand, and before I turn the light off, I write 3 things. Not a diary, not a long entry, just 3 sentences about the day. What I ate for lunch. Who I spoke to. One thing I noticed. It empties something out of my head and onto the page so it doesn't have to keep circling. And I sleep now in a way I haven't since I was much younger. I dream. That might sound like a small thing to you, but I had not remembered a dream in years, and now I dream most nights, and I wake up feeling like I went somewhere real. The 3rd thing I stopped was waiting until I was thirsty to drink water. I know. Everyone says drink more water. It's the most repeated advice in the world, and I had heard it 1,000 times and paid it no real attention. But what nobody had told me, and what I found out almost by accident, is that after a certain age the signal that tells you you're thirsty becomes unreliable. Your body needs water before the feeling of thirst arrives. And by the time you feel thirsty, you're already behind. I found this out because I went to my doctor with 3 things that had been bothering me for months. I was getting dizzy sometimes in the late afternoon. My thinking felt slow in a way that scared me a little. And my skin, which had always been reasonably good, had started looking like paper. He ran tests. Everything came back normal. I went home without an answer, and that bothered me more than a diagnosis would have. So I started keeping a small notebook, not the sleep one, a different one, and I wrote down everything I drank each day. I did this for a week. When I added it up, I was drinking maybe 4 cups of liquid a day, if that, on most days. That is less than half of what a woman my age needs. I had been mildly dehydrated for what might have been years. Treating myself that way without knowing it. What I changed was simple, and I have kept it for 6 years now. The moment my feet touch the floor in the morning, before anything else, before the coffee, before the news, before I even think about what day it is, I drink a full glass of water. I keep it on the nightstand already poured the night before, so there is no decision to make, no effort required. I just drink it. And I keep a glass on the kitchen counter visible all day, because if it's not visible I forget it exists. The dizziness in the afternoons went away in about 2 weeks. The slow thinking cleared in a way that was almost startling. I described it to my daughter as feeling like someone had cleaned the glass I'd been looking through for years. The skin I can't speak to as well because skin is slow, but my daughter told me I looked better, and she is not the kind of person who says things like that unless she means them. The fourth thing I stopped was only moving when I had somewhere to go. Now I need to explain this carefully because I know what it sounds like. It sounds like I'm going to tell you to exercise, and I am not going to tell you that. I have never been to a gym in my life, and I have no plans to start at 79. What I'm talking about is something smaller and more honest. I noticed, when I started paying attention, that I would go hours without getting out of my chair. Reading, watching something on television, talking on the phone, all of it sitting. And because I was not sedentary in the old-fashioned sense, because I did walk to the mailbox and work in the garden and go to church on Sundays, I had never thought of myself as someone who sat too much. But the sitting was there, quiet and constant, in between all the other things. What I changed was not adding exercise. It was adding movement without purpose. When the phone rings, I stand up and walk to the window while I talk. When I finish a chapter, I get up and walk to the kitchen and back before I start the next one. Before I sit down to eat, I walk to the end of the hallway and back, 10 steps, 15 steps, nothing impressive. It is almost embarrassingly small. But your body at this age is like water in a creek. When it keeps moving, it stays clear. When it stops, things start to settle and cloud. That is not a scientific explanation, but it is the truest way I know to say it. The leg heaviness that I had lived with for years, that feeling at the end of the day like my legs were full of something dense, started getting better within 2 weeks of doing this. Not gone, but lighter. Light enough that I stopped waking up at night shifting and turning trying to get comfortable. Which meant I slept better. Which meant I had more energy during the day. Which meant I moved more. Small things compound. The fifth thing I stopped was eating the same vegetables every single week and calling it healthy. This one I resisted the longest, and I want to tell you why, because I think my resistance is probably familiar to some of you. I had eaten well my whole life. Broccoli, carrots, spinach, green beans, rotating through the same trusted vegetables for decades. I cooked real food. I didn't eat from boxes. I was proud of my diet in the quiet way you're proud of something you've done consistently without much praise. So when a younger friend of mine, she's in her early 60s, practically a child to me, mentioned that gut health after 65 requires more variety than most people eat, I was irritated. I will admit that freely. I was irritated because I had been doing everything right, I thought, and here was someone telling me that the broccoli I had eaten loyally for 40 years might not be enough. I didn't change anything right away. I sat with the irritation for a few weeks. Then I started noticing, in a way I hadn't before, the bloating after lunch that I had normalized completely. The sluggishness after eating that I had accepted as a fact of getting older. The sense of heaviness in my midsection that I had stopped even mentioning to anyone because I assumed nothing could be done. So I tried something small. I bought one vegetable at the market that I would not have normally bought. Just one. A purple cabbage the first week. I had no idea what to do with it, so I looked it up and shredded it and put it in a bowl with a little vinegar and olive oil and ate it alongside dinner. The next week I tried beets, roasted in the oven. The week after that, something called bok choy that I had seen for years and never touched. I was not becoming a different person in the kitchen. I was just introducing variety into something that had become rigid without my noticing. The difference in my digestion was significant enough that I am still surprised by it when I think back. The bloating after lunch, mostly gone. The sluggishness, much reduced. The heaviness, gone in a way that I had stopped believing was possible. And something else happened that I did not expect, which is that cooking became interesting again. After decades of making the same things, there was something genuinely pleasurable about not knowing exactly how Tuesday's dinner was going to turn out. The sixth thing I stopped is the hardest one to talk about, and I almost didn't put it in here. But I think it might be the most important of all of them, and leaving it out, because it's uncomfortable, felt like a kind of dishonesty. I stopped keeping my hard feelings to myself in order to protect everyone else. I was raised in a way that many women of my generation were raised, where your job was to hold things together, to be strong, to not be a burden. When Richard was sick, I managed his care and ran the house and kept things normal for our children, who were adults by then, but still needed to believe that their mother was handling it. When he died, I told everyone I was fine, because I thought that was what strength looked like. When the loneliness came, and it came in a way I had not been prepared for, at 3 a.m, on Sunday afternoons, at the grocery store of all places, standing in front of the soup cans and suddenly finding it unbearable that there was no one to ask whether he wanted the chicken or the tomato. I closed the door on it and went back to managing. And my body kept the score, as I have since heard someone say. My blood pressure would not come down despite 2 different medications. My shoulders had a tension in them that no amount of stretching touched. I had a tiredness that sleep did not fix, the kind that lives not in your muscles, but somewhere deeper, and I did not know what to call it or what to do about it. What changed was not a single decision. It was a gradual, reluctant, slightly embarrassing process of learning to say out loud what was actually happening inside me. I called my daughter on a Tuesday, not because anything was wrong in a reportable way, but because I was having a hard day and I wanted to say so. I told my neighbor Carol that I missed Richard in a way that still surprised me some mornings, which was something I had never said to anyone in 6 years. I started being honest in small doses with the women in my church group when they asked how I was doing, instead of saying fine and smiling and moving on. None of these people fixed anything. That was not what happened. What happened was that things I had been carrying alone became, somehow, less heavy. Not because they were solved, but because they were no longer secret. My doctor was surprised when my blood pressure normalized. He adjusted my medication and then adjusted it again. He asked what I had changed, and I told him honestly that I had started talking about things I used to keep to myself, and he was quiet for a moment and then said that made sense, which I appreciated. I believe, From everything I have seen in 79 years, that emotions stored in silence do not disappear. They go somewhere in the body. They become tension and inflammation and blood pressure and that particular kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep can touch. I am not a doctor. I cannot prove this to you in a clinical way. But I have lived in this body for nearly 8 decades, and I know what it felt like before, and what it feels like now, and those are different things. So that is the 6th thing. Stop carrying it alone. Not because you are weak. Because you are not a container. You are a person, and people need to let things out. I want to finish by saying something that I mean very carefully. None of these 6 things cost money. None of them require a gym, or a program, or a specialist. They are all things I found by paying attention to my own body and being honest with myself about what I saw. You have been alive long enough to know your body better than any textbook does. The question is whether you're listening to it. I got out of that garden chair 6 years ago on the 2nd try, and I was angry about it. I am grateful for that anger now. It was the thing that made me start listening. I walk through my garden most mornings before breakfast, and I move through the world with a body that, at 79, works better than it did at 73. That should not be possible, I know. But it is what happened when I stopped doing the things that were quietly costing me more than I realized. I hope something I said today finds you at the right moment. And if it did, tell me in the comments, because that's the other thing I've learned. We do better when we talk to each other. We always have.